Welcome to the Seek Wisdom podcast, where we talk with others who love Jesus about wisdom in the faith. I'm your host, Nehemiah, and today we have two guests. So we have Alyssa Carlin and Emma Phillips. Thank you guys for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about yourselves. Emma, I'll ask you first, but how long have you been a follower of Jesus? And then what else should we know about you?
Absolutely. So, I grew up in a Christian home, so I guess my whole life. I prayed to accept Jesus in my heart when I was 5. I was baptized when I was 12. So really, I have been a part of the church since I was born. I've been part of worship teams and volunteered in other areas of the church my whole life. And so it's been an integral part of growing up for me. And as for my credentials, I am the digital marketing director at Christ Church in Illinois. I've worked here for 5 years, over 5 years now.
Oh, that's awesome.
In this role, in various roles. But yeah, it has been a great experience. Very eye-opening, challenging at times, but definitely worth it.
Cool. So, Alyssa?
Yeah, I'm Alyssa. It's similar to Emma, raised in the Lutheran church. Go Martin Luther.
Heyo.
I was, I guess, confirmed in 8th grade, and I'd say around middle school is kind of where I figured out that, like, my faith didn't necessarily need to be what my parents told me, or it became my own. So I would say middle school is kind of when I started my walk with the Lord, and have been walking with him ever since, through many different seasons. I've been working for Christ Church now for 2.5 years, and it's been an awesome experience. I'm the creative director over there, and previous to that, I've worked at a couple other churches, and I really feel like it's a calling that God has on my life. I've been gifted creatively, and I want to use that like for His glory. So even if I've worked for agencies and things like that, and it's just always back to the church. So that's me.
Well, I love that. I feel like I have a similar story of I've done photo and video for weddings and for different creative agencies and whatever, but I just feel like right now my two main clients that I work with are churches, and same kind of thing. Like, I feel like I could be making more money elsewhere or something, but I just feel this like pull on my heart that I'm like, no, I want to work with churches. Like, I feel like there's so much worth there. I feel like, I feel like I'm actually making a difference through what I'm creating, and it's not just something that's getting posted and then forgotten about forever. Like, this is actually something that, like, if I'm making a video for a church, this could change someone's life forever. This could get them to church.
Yeah, like you're hoping for that like eternal impact of what you're doing, and so it makes it that much more worthwhile and makes the harder times easier because you're like, I'm doing this for a reason.
Yeah, exactly though. I really love it, and I love talking to you guys about this because I know that you have a similar story. And one thing I wanted to ask you, this is a little off topic, but did you guys know each other before working together at Christ Church, or is that how you...
It's how we met. It was instant. And I was like, thank God for this woman. I don't know how much longer I would have survived. Because before she came, it was really just me, and we had a part-time graphics person who was there for a while before even our boss Jill came. It was literally just me and our other person, Taylor, for a 4-campus church with over 2,000 people. It was
A lot.
I think back on it and I'm like, how did we survive?
Right.
So Alyssa
You guys did it.
an actual godsend.
Well, there you go. I love that.
Not only in talent, but in like just our camaraderie and the way that we can work together, and she can listen to me complain all the time and be like, we got this, Emma. It's okay.
Right.
Solidarity.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, that's so funny. I love the teamwork, and it's been fun working with your guys' team as well with me. So it's been fun for sure. Well, kind of getting into the topic for today, I want to ask you guys about your life first, but I also first want to kind of reel it in for people listening at home or watching at home. I want to talk to you guys, as you know, today about kind of the balance between the media that we create, the creative stuff that we do. Where is the balance between, making it look really cool so that it, like, I don't know, because it's cool, because we love to, this is what we do, but also not like going overboard. Like, my example that I always think of with this back and forth is like, I've had friends who have said to me, it drives me nuts that like certain churches will preach about like generosity or like using your money for the right things, but then they'll have these like gigantic walls of art that are cool, but maybe aren't the best use of the church funds. And regardless of where you stand on that topic, like that's kind of where I want to explore, is like, where is that balance of like fostering the funds that were given to do things creatively for the church? Where do we balance that with like, making things that are cool versus making things that matter, but also that they're cool enough that people actually like watch them, consume them, things like that, that kind of back and forth. So before we get to that, I did want to ask you guys, I always ask what your life verse is. So Emma, I'll start with you again, but what is your life verse, and how do you let that impact the way that you live your life?
Absolutely. I'm a little ashamed. I had to pull it up because I don't have it memorized.
That's okay.
There's no shame here. There's no condemnation.
Now you know it's verbatim because I'm reading it.
Right.
This is the NIV version.
I was
Okay,
going to
cool.
say, what? Give me the translation.
Yeah.
But it's Romans 12, verse 6 through 8. We have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. And I think with that one, we talk a lot about our creativity being a gift from God, and it really is. Because I know that because of the times where I'm like, I don't think I could do anything else, or I can't go on any farther, and yet I still have this like part of me that wants to create, and that comes straight from God. And it just encourages me in that, for when I get bogged down, or when I get discouraged, or when I'm in those moments of life where I'm like, am I doing the right thing? Am I in the right place? Oh, my siblings are doing these grand things. Am I doing enough? Am I doing anything at all that's worthwhile? Is like saying yes, because I am exercising and using the gifts God gave me for his glory. And when it all comes down to that, I'm like, well, I don't know what else I would be doing. Right. Like, and I think that comes into, I know Alyssa leads worship at a lot of places. I love music, and I think that's another gift that I have. And so to be able to volunteer and lead worship at my church, other churches, is also just a great way to be a part of God's family, and use those gifts well.
Yeah. That's super cool. I feel like that's really applicable to our conversation today of like, the balance, but I think we do what we do because God has put that inside of us. And I think it's really cool that you use that verse to kind of draw back to the foundation of, no, God has called me to do this. And even when it's hard, or even if I'm like in a creative rut, like I'm doing this for a greater purpose than just it's my job. So that's really encouraging to me too. I love that. So thanks for sharing that. Alyssa, what is yours?
From a young age, it's always been Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. So, an oldie but a goodie. But particularly, it's the trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean on your own understanding, make your path straight. It's on a lot of signs at Hobby Lobby.
Mm-hmm.
And I think particularly I come back to lean out on your own understanding a lot. Just as a type A perfectionist, oldest child, I'm like all those archetypes like rolled into one. Sure. And I can often I mean, in work, at home, with my kids, I mean, I feel like I often feel like I've got the right answer. And because I've like worked on it and I've studied it and like I know what I'm doing. So like my way is the best way. And then something will go wrong. And I'll be like, oh, yeah, I really am not supposed to lean on my own understanding. Like there is like God has such a higher purpose than anything that I could ever cook up. And especially as a creative, like I feel like I sometimes will think outside the box and think of something really cool. And like, did I ever stop to like ask God, like, hey, what is your understanding of this situation? Like, hey, God, like, can you speak into this? So that is one that I've come to over and over. And I don't think I've ever been asked what my life verse is before. And so I really had to think about it. And I could do a lot of like, I have a lot of verses memorized about anxiety because that's another fun struggle of mine.
Fun, a gift.
It's really, I mean, like I can think through every variable
Right.
of every situation you could ever throw at me, and I could
Yep.
give you 10 different outcomes, and I'll tell you why they all could happen. It's the type A. It's the way that God made me, and you know, I just don't always have the right answer, and I have to remember to like kind of humble myself over and over. So that is especially fun working for a church when I think we can often, from the creative side, like we will have a fun solution to a problem. Like we will have something that we're like, this will be so cool. And we kind of often, at least I will forget about the other variables of ministry and like the volunteers and like all that. There's so many different layers of how we work, especially in the church. So my moral of the story, my understanding is not always the best, but I try and trust in the Lord.
Well, that's really cool. I feel like that's really applicable too to our conversation. I love the thought of like asking God what his vision for the project is, or like how you mentioned something like, God, can you speak into this as I'm kind of creating? And I think that that's something that honestly, I'm not great at doing.
No,
I
it does not
do-
come naturally.
Yeah. And I think I trust that the ideas that come when it comes to especially ministry jobs that I do come from him, but I think I could do a lot better at directly asking for his wisdom and his guidance on things because yeah, he's smarter than me, so I love that though. Cool. So I had a couple questions that I wrote for you guys that I actually want to read verbatim as well, Emma. And so I'm gonna kind of ask these, but obviously, like, let's go on a tangent if we see one. But the first question that I had was, as people who work in the creative sphere of a church, I feel like there's a balance when it comes to creating media in a lot of areas. Do you have any personal convictions surrounding quality control versus making sure things don't get out of hand? Kind of like that example of, fostering the funds well or something like that. Do you personally have any sort of convictions about that? Do you have any maybe thoughts on that broader topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I have 3 points off the top of my head, and I'll try to stick to those. Who knows? We'll see what happens. First is, digitally especially, we live in a very oversaturated world. There is just so much digital content out there. So to some extent, we have to compete. We have to pop. We have to show up and be something that people will stop and watch. And so we have to consider that. But on the other hand, the work we're doing is for the kingdom. And at the end of the day, it's not what we do, it's what God does. And so no matter the maybe quality of the video or photo or message or whatnot, he's going to use it for his good. So did I land on either side? Absolutely not. I have points for both, but hey, I think you have to look at both sides. But my third point is, I think at least for Alyssa and I, we work for a church where we have to recognize that we are privileged enough to have the luxury of that debate. Not a lot of churches are funded like we are. Right. They're just not. And so we have the ability to say, oh, well, we can upgrade our camera to get a better shot. We can upgrade our mics. We can upgrade our editing software or whatnot. We have that privilege to have this conversation and say, there is a battle, because there are churches out there that they work with what they have, and maybe it's not the best, but they are still furthering the kingdom because they're putting God's word out there. And so it's just one of those things that I think is part of the conversation, at least for us coming from our church, where we have money and can do that.
Yeah, for sure. Alyssa, do you have any thoughts on like, I love how Emma was saying it's cool that we can even be having this conversation. Do you think that there's anything based on the fact that you guys are able to be in that position? Do you think there's anything that you've had to, I don't know, have you had to think about this a lot? Is there anything that you want to talk about to further kind of that part of the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, it can go in a lot of different directions. I have, like I said before, I've worked at other churches, and I think it's interesting, the whole concept of like creators in the church. While it's not new, because like people have been like, there's beautiful cathedrals all over the world and like all that kind of stuff. Like it's not a new thing, but the role of like marketing advertising, I feel like is actually kind of new relatively. And I think back to my church growing up, and paper bulletins and everything's printed in Word in like a Calibri, like the default font. And that is the church where like I came to faith. So it's like God can move through anything, kind of like Emma said. Like you don't need a huge budget. Like people are getting by with their phones and God is still being glorified, which is awesome. But I think when the funds are there and you are able to upgrade and elevate kind of the experience, it does add a layer of, you have to kind of find that line. And my area is not necessarily super techie, although I went to a Christian college and I was on their AV team, and that was my job. And we had Cam 1 in the big auditorium, and they put me on Cam 1. I don't know if it's because I was really tall. I don't really know why. I was always on Cam 1. And this is kind of a long story, but I went through this bout of like, I think it was hypoglycemic. And so I would get really dizzy, and I'd be like, please stop putting me on Cam 1. Cause like we was standing for like 2 hours for an event, and like I would get really dizzy and really anxious, and I just didn't like it. But they're like, oh yeah, by the way, like like if you faint, like don't tip over that camera. It's $125,000. And so I'm like, oh, okay, that's a lot of money. Right. Like that's a lot of money for one. And that was one of 8 cams. And then we had 12 RoboCams. So like that is kind of like the top of my experience, where I'm like, oh, that sets off a few flags of like, I know this is like a Christian college, but like ultimately this is meant to glorify God, and like this is stadium equipment. Like who am I, a freshman, to be touching this? At the same time, I came from a church that when I got married, my husband and I, we were in a church plant that was, money was never abundant, and being a creative in that environment is actually, I mean, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but it's really hard. I can create all day in my mind, and I have like my personal computer that I'm using at home, and I'm using all this stuff and like getting paid like 10 hours a week for this church. And but actually working like 40-ish, and having like no funds for like upgrading devices, or no funds for like, hey, we want to do like a cool backdrop, or like we want to do something cool for Easter, and it's like, you have $60. Right. I've literally been in parking lots where I have pulled pallets from the dumpster because we made a pallet wall. Shout out to all the people out there who have built pallet walls. What a season the 2015s were. Yeah, I think and now being at a church that does have funds, like a lot of it is the demographic of the area. We just have a lot of people who have money and who will give. And to me, that has been a huge shift, because I'm just not used to that. And like thinking, oh, we do have money to like, I have a nice computer. Like we do have money for like monitors and equipment and stuff like that. Like what an amazing gift and a blessing that is. But at the same time, like we have to be careful, I think personally, like we can't go overboard.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's an aspect to that too, is then being appreciative of those things and using them to their fullest, and not just having them for the sake of having them, and saying, okay, well, now that we are blessed enough to have these things, what more can we do with it to help further the kingdom, to help our community, to help our congregation, to help those out there who might come across something we put out there. So let's use it well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the biggest pro that I see for the, I don't know, let's call it the money side, where money is available, is I think that to an extent, of course, the more that you're able to invest in the audio quality, the video quality, the photo quality, the graphic quality, the easier that it's going to be for someone to be reached by said items. I feel like that's the pro, right? That's the good side of it. And I think that, you know, the bad obviously is you can go overboard and you need to find that balance. But then I think too, kind of to your point, Alyssa, like there's also pros in, you know, if you're in a church that's like a startup and you don't have a lot, you can really get creative and rely on God.
You have to.
Yeah, you have to, right? And I think it teaches a good, you know, foundation so that when, kind of like you said, like you're now in this position where you are kind of on the other side of the coin, you already have that balance in your mind. You know, you have a good foundation, and you also maybe now know where to invest. Like, where are the areas that I was lacking in my other previous creative endeavors. Now I already know that that's a legitimate need and not just something that would be fun, you know? So I think, yeah, I think it's interesting, the balance for sure. The next kind of point that I wanted to ask you guys about is, so I have one of the things that I like to think about a lot as a creative working in the church world is kind of the audio and video being clear thing that I just talked about. Do you think that details like this sometimes get missed when there's too much of an emphasis on not going overboard? Like, I think that, like, to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, if we're relying too much on we need to keep things, you know, a little bit more conservatively with the spending or whatever, if we're overly worried about that, do you think that certain things that are actually important get lost? And do you have any thoughts about that? Emma, I'll look to you first again here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I I remember, and I'm thinking about all the times there's been an event or a talk or something where I'm like, oh, well, it'd be great if we could have someone there to capture this and to capture it well. And someone will come up and just be like, oh, well, I'll just record it on my phone. Right. And I'm like, okay, you know, to their credit, iPhones, other phones have gone up exceptionally in the quality of content they can capture.
Maybe not in the way that they're using them, but the potential is there.
But at the same time, I'm like, ooh, but that's not what we want. If we want to be able to utilize this for other things, for content, etc., we're going to need it to be captured a little bit better than on your iPhone from the back of the room where the audio is very... You can't hear it,
right,
really.
Like you almost, like, you could do it that way, but like it might like lose its effectiveness then, in a sense. Yeah.
Because no one's going to want to listen to echoey audio that you can't really even hear because it's bouncing all over the room. And so, yeah.
I kind of feel like that goes back kind of to the balance too of like when things, I kind of think, I'm not going to say who, because some people might know this person, but there's a person who I had kind of a similar conversation with at my last home church, and they were saying something along the lines of like, you know, I just feel like when things are overly nice, like movie quality, like in their words, it feels unnecessary. And in my head, I'm like, I think there is for sure a line where it does get unnecessary, but I loved your example about the audio. Like, if I'm scrolling through on my phone, especially if I'm a non-believer, and I come across Christian media, and not only is it something that I'm not already inherently believing in, but I can't even hear it because the audio quality is so bad, I'm probably not sticking around. I'm probably swiping away. And so I think, to your point, just like that is a really good example of why maybe it's so important to have quality when you have the ability to get it, because then it just makes it easier for people to hear the word of God and to hear, the stuff we're making, that God, it makes it easier for, not that God needs our help to use it, but I think you get what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. And I feel like that's sometimes half to 80% of the battle of creatives in the church world, because the church, no offense, is sometimes a little behind the times and catching up. And so for a lot of it is just defending our position and defending the necessity of these things and defending the necessity of not paper bulletins printed off of Word and not, like having quality creative products that can reach people and will be effective in reaching them. I mean, you said it, Alyssa, that marketing is new to the church, and in a world where marketing is everything. I mean, look at the Super Bowl, look at commercials, look at anything. If we're going to reach that person who is not churched, who has no relationship with Christ whatsoever, we have to be on the level of the rest of the world in order to capture their attention, whether that's a bulletin handout, a slide, a video, any sort of audio recording. All of that needs to be to the level of the world to compete. And so, yeah, it is sometimes hard to communicate that in the church world to people who aren't creatives. Yeah.
Alyssa, I think I'm going to ask you the other side of the coin, if you're down.
Happy to.
I kind of have this written here, but I have playing to the other side of the argument. A conviction that I have personally is not going overboard on gear. Like, I'm a videographer, right? And so types of cameras, types of lenses, stuff like that. When it comes to church media, and I think having a clear quality image is important, but could you, in theory, you could in theory spend like 5 to 6 figures on a camera, right? Like you said, that church that you were at, it was 125,000 and it was one of 8. So that adds up to a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
Right. And so kind of the question that I have is, do you think that there's a danger in temptation to get too nice of equipment and using clear communication as a justification? Like, do you think that, I don't know, like, I think it's an obvious yes, but like, I don't know. I just feel like it's important to talk a little bit on the other side of that. Do you have any thoughts about where that line might be, or where it is for you, or anything like that?
Yes. I think I have an internal little red flag that can kind of go off, and maybe that is the Holy Spirit just being like, "Hey, your motivation behind this is maybe a little weird. Like, you might want to check this." And my vice is not gear, it's fonts.
Sure.
And those can add up. And I'm like, you know what? This font is really going to make this project. Like, I just really need this font. And then I like might buy it and then just not use it. And I'm like, oh, whoops.
Right.
Oh man. Like, there is a certain level of stewardship that we have to remember, like, especially working, like being employed by a church, like we are funded by the tithes of other people. And I do think that's really important to remember when it can be tempting to go overboard or like just get one more font, just get one more background pack. Like, it's fine. Like, just sign up for one more monthly subscription and we're going to like be totally set on our like social media graphics. And while that may be true, I think a lot of those resources are particularly the subscriptions. Like, that's, I could talk about that for 2 hours in the church creative world. Like, that makes my life a lot easier, but especially for churches that don't have a lot of funds, a $25 like graphics thing where they don't have to be designing things in like Word or Canva, like they can do it themselves, is amazing. But I think that can quickly add up and go overboard when you are not stewarding the funds of the people in the church well. Like, I would just think in the same way, like you talked in the beginning a little bit about like, hey, this church is preaching about giving and generosity. And yet like we look around and they have like a fancy cappuccino machine and like they have like murals on the walls and they have all this kind of stuff. Me as a creative, I look around and I'm like, wow, they really put in so much time and thought into their visual. And like, I see the beauty of it. I see where they're going with it. And at the same time, I can absolutely see somebody who like, they don't have that set of like goggles on and they're just like, what is this? Like, why would the church spend this much money on this kind of stuff? Like, they could be feeding people. Like, that's what I go back to in my mind. Like, they could be giving this to a homeless shelter. And so when Emma is talking about non-believers, like we have to be up to their level. I do think that is true. I think 100% the world, we see graphics every single day. Everybody's on social media. If our stuff looks like trash, it's going to be like, why would I ever go there? At the same time, through the lens of an unbeliever coming in, if they see like opulence in your space or they're seeing like crazy camera equipment or like things being used irresponsibly, like they can sniff that out. They're already kind of looking for ways that like maybe the church is lying to me or maybe the church like it's not what it says it is. Like we want to give them authenticity in the best way that we can with the tools that we have. I think that ultimately if that is your aim and that's your goal, like God will direct you down that path. But you do have to be kind of aware, like, hey, you don't need more fonts.
Right. Well, and also, too, I feel like it comes down to, like, our personal relationship with Jesus as people working in the creative field at a church. Like, if we're not in tune to the voice of the Holy Spirit, it's going to be easier for us to go overboard. And it's going to be easier for us to not have that, like, red flag pop up, like you mentioned. And you know, I'm preaching to myself here. Like, I'm like, I gotta make sure, you know, like, I gotta make sure this is a good checkup on me, you know. But I think that's good. I think this topic is hard, which is part of why I wanted to talk to you guys about it, because I feel like I could talk to, you know, my mom or a pastor or some other believer about this who isn't directly working in the creative field. They may even be a creative, but being a creative in the church, I think there's this added layer of like, man, like you said, Alyssa, like this is someone's tithe. I need to make sure that I'm caring about that balance, because it is a balance. Like you said, Emma, like if our stuff looks like crap, like, no, why are we even making it then? Because like it's not
It'd be better to not make it.
Yeah, it'd be better to not make it. It would honestly probably be a better steward of people's money to not spend it, to make stuff that's not gonna do anything. And so, yeah, I think part of the reason that I wanted to talk about this was because I think it is hard. And I think that me personally, if I'm gonna try and sort this out for myself and get wiser about this topic for my own, you know, decision making, I want to ask people who are also probably having to, you know, handle this balance yourself.
I think one more point on that. I think it's also helpful too is to one of the responsibilities in looking for a job and working for a church is finding one that has a solid leadership structure. So our church has a solid team of elders and a solid team of deacons, which are responsible for financial transactions made by the church and making sure that the church is stewarding its money well. And so yes, we have to be responsible for ourselves, but having a system with those checks and balances can also be very helpful because, I mean, I'm right on that boat. I can easily get carried away. Oh my gosh, I want this lens. I want this editing software. I want this new computer so I can use this feature. I want this. But when there is that extra level at the top saying like, hey, no, we have to go through an approval process for big spending, then it's like, okay, great. There is checks in place so that the church itself can't just run off the rails with how money is being spent. There is actual oversight there.
Yeah, that's really good. I love that. That's such a good point. I think that honestly gets lost. And I don't even really think about that much either, is like oftentimes maybe these churches that we're maybe thinking of as going overboard, that might either not be a factor or
maybe that's what they prioritize.
Right.
I mean, like I can think of like there's recording studios and like production companies now that are like specifically making Christian content, and like that's what they're pouring their heart and soul into to reach people. Like I can see churches doing the same thing. Like we want this to be a comfortable, like what do they call like Starbucks, like a third space or something. Like you can think of the same model for the church. Like we want this to be a place that people like love and they feel great and they see stuff on the screens and it makes them feel happy. Like if that is their priority, like more power to them. If they're reaching people for God, that is fine. I think that's just a church has to figure out its priorities.
Well, yeah, and I think on the positive end of this, kind of to circle back, I feel like we've talked a lot about the checks and balances, but I feel like I would love to kind of wrap this up talking about the happy side a little bit. I think there's definitely some people that I have in mind in my life who are going to watch this who are thinking, I'm glad they're talking a lot about the checks and balances because I'm concerned about that as a churchgoer. But that being said, I would love to hear your guys' perspective on the good side, the happy side, the like why we care so deeply and the why we want to make it good. And like, for example, kind of to segue into maybe your thoughts, Emma, you guys just had hired me to do a video at the women's get-together event this past month. And there was just so much like joy from me to be like, I get to spotlight an area of the church that women might not even know is happening. Like this is an opportunity for them to grow in their faith. They don't even know what's happening every month. And I get to use my gifts that God has given me creatively to make something that not only showcases that this opportunity exists, but they can actually see it and it looks cool. So it's like, ooh, I want to go to that. So could you maybe just talk even from your perspective, like, I don't know, just about the good and about like the why we do what we do and the side of things about quality control mattering and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I really think you hit the nail on the head with the visual aspect of it. Being able to show someone what they're going to experience or what they can experience can be a game changer. I mean, think of how you learn about new places, or new restaurants or whatever. What is the first thing you do? You Google them or you look them up on social media and you look through the pictures to get a sense of, for lack of a better term, what the vibe is and how you are going to feel going into that space. Being able to creatively capture and present what the soul and feeling of our church is probably our deepest desire, is to be like, hey guys, this is a great place to be. Because yes, we want to further the kingdom and we want to spread the gospel, but we also want to be that third place, that space of community that people can come to even if you're not a Christian. Like, let's take away that barrier of insecurity of like, ooh, I don't know that I would ever go into a church. No, let's show them what it'll look like. It'll look like people coming together, hanging out, having a great time, and walking through life together. It's a very Christianese term, but you know, it's the truth. It is being able to portray that well. And that's where that quality side comes in. If you can't capture that well, then it doesn't translate well digitally. Not in this world with cinematic quality photography and videography on social media, on Google, anywhere you go to look something up, it's all professionally done. And so being able to actually capture the feeling in a space, in a time, at an event, whatever, and show that is, I think, one of the highlights of what we get to do.
Yeah, I think one of the things that came to mind for me while you were answering is like just the thought of like capturing the space cinematically. Like I almost want to reframe that a little bit to like in my head, there's a really good side to the glamorization of life through media. It's kind of like, you know, when you watch that old home video that your grandma made of your mom when she was little or something, and you're like, oh my gosh, like this looks so wonderful and so cute and fun. And, you know, I think it's okay to look on those memories fondly. Yeah. It's, you know, this isn't like, oh, well, she should have been in the moment. She, you know, like, I don't think we think that, you know, we think, wow, I feel like I'm right there. Like, I'm so happy, you know, being in that. And I think that that's the good side of kind of doing things well and like capturing things and like promoting things is it's like there's now this like, you know, kind of glamorization of life, but I think that's not always a bad thing. I think that life has a lot of wonderful parts to it as well as hard parts to it. And I think if we're always focused on the cynical side and always focused on, I don't know, just the checks and balances, that we can miss out on the wonderful parts of life and the wonderful parts of the church. And like, I think it's worth capturing the wonderful parts of the church and the ministry and the worship and the community. And these are things that are not only worth capturing, but worth showing off to other people so that they can hopefully partake themselves. So.
And I think, too, you brought up a point about authenticity. And I think a lot of times people think authenticity and quality are antonyms. But I don't think that's the case. I think you can capture something with quality that is still authentic. And yes, we are putting our best foot forward, but we're not putting a false foot forward. It is still a true representation of who we are. We're just showing it to the best of our ability and to make it as inviting as possible to people.
For sure. Alyssa, do you have any thoughts you want to share about that?
I mean, I think you guys have covered a lot of it. The only thing I can think of in terms of graphics, I often think that my job is such a blessing in a lot of ways, working for the church, because Emma and I have seen like time and time again, like we've been able to go to conferences and we've been able to uh, look into these like deeper resources, and like it keeps leading me back to like our God is a creative God, and we get to kind of do what we do as a reflection of that creativity. And that is ultimately, I mean, awesome. Like that's a part of like that's a huge part of my calling. And I think we have to remember that that is important. Like God created beauty for a reason, and he created us as people, like we look for it. And so like we have an opportunity to create that beauty for somebody who's like maybe not even looking for it, who like gets caught off guard by like maybe something that they see on social media that we would share, or that would come with a friend to church and we show like one of your videos on a Sunday and they're like, wow, like that community looks incredible. Like I think it's actually a pretty high calling, what we have for reflecting like the creativity of God. And it's really cool to explore, especially in like different ways. Like I think now on our team, we're like exploring stage design, and we're exploring like immersive design, and like going out into the community and marketing in different ways. And like uh, that that aspect of working as a creative in the church is really cool.
Super cool. Yeah, I love that. I love your kind of image of someone seeing something that the team creates and is like inspired. I think.
That's the goal.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
like-
mean, that's what we're going for.
even just for ourselves.
I mean,
like-
and let it not be me. Like, let it be inspiration from the Lord. Like, let it be something that I've created that hit something deep in someone that they were looking for. I mean, I always feel awkward. Like I never know what to say for like wow, that graphic looks so cool. And I'm like, great. Like, thank you. Thank you. Like, I do think I'm very good at my job, but at the same time, like, I won't, like, it's a gift from the Lord that I can do this at all. And so I'm glad that you were communicated with effectively. Like, yeah, what do you say?
No, that's funny. Yeah. I also think too, like, I loved how you said something along the lines of like showing beauty when someone wasn't even expecting to find it or something like that. I almost got this like mental image of someone coming in to church or like scrolling on their phone and they're like really depressed and they see something that we've created and they're like, I don't know, they get to see the beauty of life in that moment and they're inspired or their spirits are lifted. And I think that that's just one of the many reasons why we do what we do. It's one of the many things that God uses what we create for, is to even not so directly as to promote a ministry or to share a message recap so that someone can be directly evangelized to. I think there's also those, like, I don't want to say smaller, but like maybe not as noticed effects, like, you know, just lifting someone's spirits who maybe is really going through something hard. Maybe they're even a Christian and they just are having a hard time seeing God's light in this season. They can maybe kind of see that again through the things that we make. And I think that's really cool. So,
Yeah, and I think of how often, like, the three of us, or like Emma and I, are like literally like sharing reels and sharing like images, and like literally it's like a constant conversation, and I have to believe that most of the world is doing the same thing. Like, it is a share. Like, I see and I share, I see and I share, and like to be a part of that for somebody who, like, hey, if I'm seeing this post from Christ Church and I'm like, wow, this really inspired me, like, can I inspire somebody else? Like, that is really cool in itself too. And I think something that we have to keep in mind, like, I think this maybe will reach one person. Like, the reach is that much greater now. So no pressure.
no, that's super good though. I love that. Cool. Well, this has been really fun. Thank you guys so much for coming on.
Yeah.
So welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, where can people who are listening or watching or whatever, where can we find the media that you guys create, some of the media that I've created for you guys? Where on socials should we be looking?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're on Instagram at ChristchurchIL. That's probably the best place to go. We do have a TikTok, and but Instagram is kind of where we live right now. Yeah, with our demographic. We also do have YouTube, Christchurch IL as well, or our website houses a lot of our stuff too, christchurchil.org. So feel free to check it out. You can see some of our work, some of Nehemiah's work. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, cool. Well, you guys heard them there. And if you want to see more from the Seek Wisdom podcast, we are on all platforms: Spotify, Apple Music. We're on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. We're all over the place. So we do episodes every other week. We do short form twice a week on most social media platforms. So that's just at Seek Wisdom Podcast. And thank you guys so much for watching, for listening, and we will see you guys next time.